The hospital was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound echo against the walls. Machines beeped in slow, steady rhythms, and the smell of disinfectant filled the air. In one of the small, pale-colored rooms on the third floor, a little girl named Emily lay motionless on her bed. She looked fragile, like a small flower that had been battered by too many storms. Her skin was pale, her hair thin from weeks of treatments, and her breaths were so soft that her mother often leaned closer, just to make sure she was still breathing. Emily was only 7 years old, but life had already tested her in the hardest ways. For months she had been fighting an illness that the doctors couldn't seem to cure. At first the family had hope. The doctors had tried every possible medicine, every kind of therapy, and every treatment plan they could think of. There were days when Emily would smile weakly at her parents, whisper that she wanted to go home, and talk about playing in the garden with her dog, Max. But as weeks turned into months, those moments grew fewer and farther between. Her father sat in a chair by the window, his face buried in his hands. He had not slept properly in days. His suit, once crisp and neat, was now wrinkled, showing how he had been living at the hospital, unable to leave his daughter's side. Her mother, sitting right next to Emily's bed, gently stroked her little girl's hand. She whispered words of comfort, prayers and songs Emily used to love when she was healthy. But Emily's eyes stayed closed, her body still, her strength fading more and more each day. The doctors had gathered earlier in the morning to discuss Emily's condition. They stood in the hallway just outside the room, speaking in low tones. Their white coats made them look calm and professional, but the heaviness in their voices told a different story. They believed Emily's suffering had reached a point where nothing else could be done. Her organs were beginning to weaken, her body had stopped responding to the treatments, and they feared she was living in pain that she couldn't even express anymore. One of the senior doctors, a man with years of experience, explained to Emily's parents that the time had come to make a very difficult decision. His voice was heavy, his eyes serious. He told them that sometimes keeping a child in such a condition alive only added to the suffering. He suggested that it might be better to let Emily go peacefully, to end her pain with a final medical procedure. The words landed like a storm inside the hearts of Emily's parents. Her mother broke into tears immediately, her body shaking as she held her daughter's hand even tighter. Her father stood still, frozen by shock. They knew Emily's condition was serious, but they had never imagined that the doctors would suggest something so final. For hours they argued with themselves, with their faith, with the cruel hand of fate. Could they really say goodbye to their little girl in such a way? Was it even fair to her to hold on when her body was giving up? The decision tore them apart. They wanted to believe in a miracle, but they had already watched too many weeks of disappointment. The doctors assured them this was the merciful choice, the only way to end her suffering. After long, painful hours of tears, prayers, and desperate questions with no answers, Emily's parents finally gave their consent. They signed the papers with trembling hands, their hearts breaking with every stroke of the pen. While all this was happening inside, just outside the hospital doors, a German shepherd named Max sat anxiously. Max had been with Emily since she was a baby. The bond between the girl and her dog was something no one could fully explain. Whenever Emily cried, Max would nuzzle against her until she smiled. Whenever she was sick, Max would not leave her side. Even when she came to the hospital, Max would wait at the entrance, wagging his tail every time the family came or went. On this day, Max was more restless than ever. He whined, paced back and forth, and scratched at the hospital doors. He seemed to sense something inside was not right. The security guard outside tried to calm him, giving him water and patting his head, but Max didn't settle. His sharp eyes were fixed on the hospital windows and his ears twitched at every sound. It was as if his heart knew Emily was in danger, though no one around him could understand what he was feeling. Inside the room, preparations were quietly being made. A nurse walked in, her face calm but her eyes heavy with sorrow. She checked the equipment one last time, setting things in order. The senior doctor stood nearby, reviewing the files, waiting for the right moment. Emily's parents sat close together, holding on to each other for strength, though their eyes were red with endless crying. The air in the room grew heavy, filled with sadness that seemed to press down on everyone's chest. Max, sitting outside, suddenly let out a sharp bark. It was loud enough to make a few people in the corridor jump. He pulled at the leash tied to the railing, barking again and again, his tail stiff, his body tense. Nurses passing by looked out the window, puzzled by the dog's strange behavior. Some shook their heads, thinking he was just upset at being separated from his owner. But Max's barking grew louder, more urgent, as if he was calling out, warning them that something terrible was about to happen. Back in the room, Emily lay quietly, her small chest rising and falling faintly. Her mother pressed her forehead to her daughter's hand, whispering one last prayer for a miracle. Her father squeezed her shoulders, trying to be strong for both of them, though tears rolled silently down his face. The doctor lifted his eyes from the chart, nodded to the nurse, and prepared to move forward. And at that very moment, Max threw his head back and let out the loudest bark he had ever made in his life. It was a sound so fierce and full of urgency that it echoed across the hospital walls. He pulled so hard at the leash that it snapped against the railing, and before anyone could stop him, Max charged through the hospital entrance. The startled security guard tried to grab him, but Max was too fast. He sprinted through the corridors, his paws thundering against the tiles, his deep growl warning anyone who tried to block his path. Patients turned their heads, nurses gasped, and doctors shouted in alarm, but nothing slowed him down. Somehow, as if guided by an invisible thread, Max ran straight toward Emily's room. Inside, no one yet knew what was coming. The doctor raised his hand, ready to begin the procedure. Emily's parents held each other tightly, their hearts breaking as they whispered their goodbyes. The nurse prepared the equipment, her own hands trembling slightly despite years of experience. The room was filled with a painful silence, the kind that comes just before something irreversible. And then, in a sudden crash, the door burst open. The sound made everyone jump, their eyes flying to the doorway. There, standing tall with his fur bristling and his eyes blazing with determination, was Max. He had stormed into the room, ignoring every rule, every barrier, every human hand that had tried to stop him. The German shepherd had come for his girl. The room fell into stunned silence as the large German shepherd stood in the doorway, his chest rising and falling as he panted heavily from the sprint through the hospital. His eyes were sharp and unyielding, fixed on the little girl lying motionless on the bed. For a moment, no one moved. Nurses froze in their steps, the doctor's hand hovered in midair, and Emily's parents sat with wide eyes, unable to understand what had just happened. Max growled softly, a low, protective sound that rumbled from deep within his chest. His body language was clear. No one was to come near Emily. His tail was stiff, his ears were perked forward, and his stance was firm, like a soldier guarding the most important treasure in the world. Everyone could feel his determination. The doctor, a man who had always prided himself on keeping calm in emergencies, felt his throat go dry. He had seen many things in his years of practice, but never a dog storming into a hospital room at the exact moment of such a critical procedure. His hand trembled slightly as he lowered the syringe he had been holding. For a brief second, doubt flickered in his mind. Was this just coincidence, or was there something more to this moment? Emily's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her father stood up quickly, as if pulled by some invisible force, his eyes filling with tears he hadn't been able to cry before. "Max," he whispered, his voice breaking. The German shepherd's ears twitched at the sound of his name, but his gaze never left Emily. One of the nurses finally found her voice. "We need to get that dog out of here," she said, though her tone lacked the usual authority. Even she was shaken by the timing of Max's arrival. A few of the hospital staff moved forward carefully, hoping to guide the dog away without causing a scene. But Max was not going anywhere. He bared his teeth just enough to make his warning clear. He stood firmly between Emily and everyone else, blocking the bed with his body. His fur stood on edge, his muscles were tense, and he seemed larger than ever before. When a nurse tried to step closer, Max let out a sharp bark that made everyone flinch. The sound, though frightening to the staff, had another effect in the room. Emily's fingers twitched slightly on the bedsheet. It was such a small movement that most people missed it, but her mother noticed. She leaned closer, her eyes wide, whispering, "Emily? Emily, sweetheart, can you hear me?" The little girl's lips parted and a weak, barely audible sound escaped. "Max," she whispered, her voice no louder than a breath. The entire room froze again, but this time for a different reason. For weeks, Emily had been silent, unresponsive to everything around her. The doctors had insisted she was too far gone, too weak to respond. But now, in the presence of her beloved dog, she had spoken. The faint call of his name was enough to shake everyone's certainty. Her mother broke down in tears, clutching her daughter's hand with both of her own. She spoke. She spoke. She cried, her voice trembling with both hope and disbelief. Her father stepped closer, placing his hand gently on Emily's forehead, whispering her name over and over as if the repetition might bring her further back. The senior doctor's face grew pale. He glanced at the nurses, then back at Emily. His mind, which had been so certain about the decision only minutes before, now wrestled with the undeniable truth before his eyes. The child who was supposed to have no more strength left had called out to her dog. Could they really go through with their original plan now? Max climbed up onto the side of the bed, his large paws resting gently near Emily's legs. He lowered his head, pressing his muzzle softly against her arm. Emily's lips curled ever so slightly into a faint smile. It was weak, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The dog licked her hand, and she moved her fingers enough to touch his fur. The staff who had been ready to remove the dog stopped in their tracks. No one dared break the fragile moment unfolding before them. The nurse who had spoken earlier covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. Even she, a professional who had seen countless patients, could not ignore what was happening. The doctor cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "This doesn't change her condition," he said firmly, though his voice lacked conviction. "She is still very weak and her body is failing. One small reaction does not mean she can recover." But as he spoke, his eyes betrayed his doubt. Emily's father turned sharply toward him. His voice, once filled with despair, now carried anger and determination. "You told us there was no hope. You told us she couldn't respond anymore. But look at her. She just spoke. How can you call this nothing?" The doctor opened his mouth to reply, but he couldn't find the words. Max growled softly again, as if supporting the father's statement. The sound filled the room with a strange kind of authority, as though the dog himself was demanding that everyone pay attention to what they were seeing. Moments later, more hospital staff rushed in, alerted by the commotion. They were shocked to find a German shepherd guarding a little girl's bed, refusing to let anyone near her. Some tried to argue that animals weren't allowed in sterile spaces, that this was dangerous, but others, after seeing Emily whisper her dog's name, stood silently, unsure of what was right anymore. Emily's breathing grew a little stronger as she clung weakly to Max's fur. Her mother whispered encouragement into her ear, telling her that she was not alone, that Max had come to save her. The girl's eyelids fluttered as if she were trying to open them, and her cheeks showed a faint trace of color that had been missing for days. The younger doctor in the room, who had been quietly observing everything, finally stepped forward. "Wait," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the noise. Everyone turned to him. "Before we continue with anything, I think we need to recheck her vitals. If she can respond even faintly, we owe her that much." The senior doctor frowned, uncomfortable with the sudden challenge to his authority. But the younger doctor's words carried a weight that was hard to deny. The parents immediately agreed, nodding desperately. "Yes, please," Emily's father pleaded. "Check her again. Do something, anything, but don't give up on her now." Max settled himself fully onto the bed now, lying down gently beside Emily, his body curled protectively around her. His steady breathing and warm presence seemed to calm her. Her small hand rested against his fur, as if drawing strength from him. The dog's eyes stayed sharp, watching every move the adults made, ensuring no one came near with harmful intent. The atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Only minutes before, the family had been preparing to say a final goodbye. Now hope flickered like a fragile candle that refused to go out, and at the very center of it all was a loyal dog who had broken every rule, every barrier to stand between his girl and the shadow of death. For the first time in weeks, Emily was not alone in her fight. The air inside the hospital room felt heavier than ever. Everyone stood frozen, still processing what had just happened. The German shepherd, Max, was lying protectively beside Emily, his body pressed against her weak frame, his eyes glowing with unshakable determination. No one dared move closer, not even the senior doctor who had been moments away from carrying out the final procedure. Emily's parents clung to each other, their emotions tangled between fear, hope, and disbelief. Just minutes earlier, they had been ready to say goodbye forever. But now their daughter had whispered her dog's name, and that faint voice carried more power than anything they had heard from the doctors. It was proof that Emily was still there, still fighting and still aware. The young doctor who had insisted on rechecking her vitals stepped forward. He carefully picked up the monitor and wrapped the cuff gently around Emily's tiny arm. Max lifted his head and growled softly at the movement, but the doctor paused, spoke calmly, and showed his hands to the dog. "I'm only checking her," he said softly, as though Max could understand. Somehow, the German shepherd seemed to know. He lowered his head again, keeping his eyes on the man's every move but allowing him to continue. The machine beeped, and everyone in the room leaned in as numbers flickered across the screen. Emily's heart rate was faint but steady, not as weak as the records had shown the previous day. Her oxygen level, though still low, was showing small improvements. The younger doctor frowned, then checked again just to be sure. "Her readings are stronger than yesterday," he said, his voice filled with both surprise and caution. "This is not what we expected." The senior doctor shook his head, unwilling to accept the sudden change. "Machines can fluctuate," he said quickly. "It doesn't mean anything significant. We must not be swayed by illusions." But even as he spoke, his voice lacked the confidence it usually carried. He could not deny the evidence appearing in front of him, nor the fact that the girl had spoken. Emily's mother pressed her forehead against her daughter's hand, whispering, "You hear that, sweetheart? You're stronger today." Max knew. He came for you because he knew. Her father wiped his tears and held Emily's other hand, squeezing gently, hoping she could feel his touch. The nurse who had been ready to assist earlier now stepped back, tears brimming in her eyes. She had worked in the hospital for years, and though she believed in science, she also believed in the mysteries of life that medicine could not always explain. Looking at Emily and Max, she whispered under her breath, "This is not just chance." Suddenly, Emily's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, with great effort, she opened them halfway. Her eyes were glassy and tired, but they were open. Her mother gasped loudly, her father's knees nearly gave way, and Max wagged his tail, whining with joy. The little girl's lips moved again, and though her voice was weak, she whispered one clear word. "Home." That single word was like a spark igniting a fire in the hearts of everyone present. Emily wanted to live. She wanted to go home. She wanted more time, and her dog, loyal and unyielding, had refused to let anyone take that away from her. The younger doctor turned sharply to the senior physician. "We cannot proceed," he said firmly. "She's responding. Her vitals are better. We need to reevaluate her case immediately." The senior doctor opened his mouth to argue, but the weight of the moment pressed against him. Around him, nurses and family members looked at him with pleading eyes. Even the staff who had been skeptical earlier now felt the shift. The room was no longer filled with despair. It was filled with fragile hope. He sighed heavily, lowering his gaze. "Very well," he muttered. "We will re-examine her." Emily's mother broke down in tears of relief, kissing her daughter's forehead again and again. Her father leaned over, whispering promises of strength and love. Max licked Emily's hand softly, his tail thumping against the bed in rhythm, his job far from over but his first mission accomplished. The hospital staff quickly organized themselves. Blood tests were ordered, scans were scheduled, and new treatment discussions began. The atmosphere, once drowned in sorrow, now buzzed with urgency and determination. Everyone wanted to see if there was a path forward, something they had overlooked before. Max refused to leave Emily's side. Nurses tried to guide him out of the room, but every time they tugged gently on his collar, he growled low, his body stiffening in defiance. Finally, Emily's father spoke up. "He stays. If my daughter could speak, she would want him here. And after what just happened, I think we all know she needs him." The staff exchanged uncertain glances, but no one dared to argue. It was as if the dog had earned the right to remain where he was. As the hours passed, doctors came in and out, each examining Emily with fresh eyes. The younger doctor stayed by her side most of the time, speaking softly to her, explaining every step as if he believed she could hear and understand. And each time Max felt unsure, the doctor reached out his hand to show he meant no harm. Slowly, a strange trust began to form between man and dog. Emily's body showed small but undeniable signs of life. Her grip, though weak, grew a little firmer when her parents held her hands. Her breathing steadied, her pulse showed improvement, and she even managed to move her lips into the faintest of smiles when Max rested his head on her chest. Her parents couldn't stop crying, but this time their tears were filled with joy. They thanked God, they thanked the doctors who were now working with renewed energy, and they thanked Max over and over. telling him he was their angel in fur. The senior doctor, though humbled, couldn't shake the image of the dog storming into the room. In all his years of practice, he had trusted medicine, logic, and experience above everything else. But what he had witnessed that day shook his beliefs. He found himself asking questions he had never dared to consider before. Could there be things beyond medicine, instincts beyond science that played a role in healing? By the time night fell, Emily was still fragile, but she was holding on. The euthanasia papers lay forgotten on the doctor's desk, never to be touched again. Instead, a new file was being prepared, a new treatment plan, a new chance. Max remained curled up beside his girl, his eyes never closing, his body acting as her shield. Nurses brought him water and even a blanket, but he didn't care for himself. His only concern was Emily. Every time she stirred, he lifted his head, watching over her like a guardian. The hospital had witnessed many stories of struggle, recovery, and loss, but that day, something different had unfolded. Something unexplainable. Something that would be remembered by everyone who had been there. A child who was about to be lost had been pulled back by the loyalty and love of her dog, and deep down even the doctors knew. This was just the beginning. The next morning, the hospital room felt different. The air was no longer heavy with despair. It was filled with quiet anticipation. Emily lay in her bed, still fragile, but there was a subtle light in her eyes that had been missing for weeks. Her chest rose and fell steadily, and for the first time the monitors reflected numbers that suggested real hope. Max lay beside her, alert and watchful, occasionally nudging her hand to remind her that he was there. The younger doctor, who had insisted on rechecking Emily's vitals the day before, entered the room once again. He was careful, gentle, and full of a cautious optimism. "Emily, can you hear me?" he asked softly. She blinked slowly and gave a faint nod. The doctor's heart lifted. This small gesture, though so minor, was enough to prove that she was aware, that she still had life in her, and that perhaps, just perhaps, she had a chance. Max's ears perked at the doctor's voice, and he let out a low whine as if urging him to be careful. The dog's presence had become more than comforting. It was almost as if Max had an instinct to protect, guide, and encourage everyone around Emily. The nurses watched him closely, some shaking their heads in disbelief. They had seen loyalty before, but nothing like this. The senior doctor walked in next, his expression unreadable. He had spent the night reviewing Emily's file, feeling a mix of embarrassment and unease. He had almost allowed a fatal decision, and the weight of that nearly overwhelming mistake pressed on him. Seeing Emily respond, even slightly, brought a mixture of relief and guilt. He cleared his throat and addressed the younger doctor. "Check everything again. I want a full reassessment," he said, his voice steady but carrying an edge of humility. The younger doctor quickly organized tests and scans, ensuring every measure was taken to assess Emily's condition accurately. As the medical staff prepared the equipment, Emily shifted slightly in her bed. Max immediately pressed closer, his body curling protectively around her, growling softly when anyone came near. The staff quickly learned that any movement towards the child required careful coordination with the dog. Max's loyalty was unwavering, and it became clear that he was not just a pet. He was a guardian. Blood tests were taken, scans were performed, and the results slowly began to paint a new picture. Emily's vitals were improving in ways no one had anticipated. What had once seemed irreversible now showed potential for recovery. The younger doctor studied the charts, running calculations and cross-referencing with medical records. The senior doctor, observing silently, could hardly believe what he was seeing. There was no room for error in this moment. Every number, every reading was crucial. Finally, after several hours of detailed evaluation, the younger doctor turned to the senior physician with a mixture of awe and caution. "Her condition is serious, but there are treatment options we hadn't considered before. With proper care, she has a real chance of recovery." The senior doctor nodded slowly, swallowing hard. We nearly made a mistake that would have been irreversible," he admitted quietly, his voice almost a whisper. The staff in the room absorbed his words with a solemn silence. The weight of what could have been hung heavily in the air. Emily's parents held each other tightly, overwhelmed by relief and lingering fear. Her mother gently brushed Emily's hair from her face, tears running freely down her cheeks. "We almost lost you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But Max saved you." Emily's weak fingers moved slightly, reaching out to touch her mother's hand. Her father squeezed her hand gently, whispering words of love and encouragement, telling her to hold on, to fight, and to keep believing. Max, sensing the subtle shift in Emily's condition, laid his head on her chest. His eyes were bright, alert, and full of understanding. He had accomplished his first task, stopping the irreversible procedure. But now he had a new role, to remain vigilant as Emily slowly regained strength. He stayed by her side at all times, never leaving, never allowing anyone to come between him and the little girl. The hospital room became a scene of cautious hope. Doctors moved in and out, discussing treatment plans and adjusting medications. Nurses monitored her every breath, every movement, ready to respond at a moment's notice. The parents, exhausted but determined, stayed close, whispering words of love and reassurance. And through it all, Max remained the silent sentinel, his presence a constant source of comfort and security. As the day went on, Emily's color began to return gradually. Her cheeks, once pale and lifeless, now showed a faint flush. Her lips curved into the tiniest of smiles whenever Max nudged her gently. It was a fragile smile, but it was proof that life was still within her. Her parents watched, holding back tears as hope began to take root again in their hearts. The senior doctor, observing quietly, finally spoke to the younger doctor. I underestimated the situation, he admitted. I allowed myself to believe that her condition was hopeless, but this is remarkable. The younger doctor nodded, keeping his eyes on Emily as he responded, It's not just medicine. Sometimes instincts, loyalty, and love can make a difference where science alone cannot. Word of the German Shepherd's intervention had begun to spread quietly throughout the hospital. Staff members whispered to each other, sharing stories of Max's heroic entry into the room. Some were skeptical at first, dismissing it as coincidence, but seeing Emily respond to her dog's presence made it impossible to ignore. Max had altered the course of events, changed the future, and no one could deny the impact he had on the little girl's survival. By evening, Emily was awake for short periods, responding to gentle questions and showing signs of recognition. Her parents were beside themselves with relief, holding her hands, speaking softly and never leaving her side. Max remained curled against the bed, his gaze sweeping the room continuously, alert for any sign of danger or distress. He had become an integral part of Emily's care team, and everyone who saw him understood that he was no ordinary dog. The senior doctor finally spoke again, addressing the parents. We have a new treatment plan. It will be slow and it will require patience and care, but your daughter has a real chance. We will do everything we can to help her recover. The mother's voice shook as she responded, Thank you so much. And thank you, Max, she said, gently patting the dog who wagged his tail weakly but happily. That night, as Emily slept in the hospital bed, Max lay beside her, keeping watch. Every sound, every shadow, every movement was observed by his protective eyes. The little girl, though exhausted, seemed calmer, comforted by his presence. Her parents finally rested, leaning against each other with hope renewed, knowing that tomorrow held another chance at life. The hospital staff left the room quietly, respecting the fragile moment. The younger doctor stayed briefly, monitoring Emily one last time before stepping out, glancing at Max with admiration. The German Shepherd had done more than protect a patient. He had given everyone in that room a renewed sense of faith in the unexpected ways that life can work. In the days that followed, Emily continued to show slow but steady improvement. Max remained steadfast by her side, never allowing her to feel alone or scared. The bond between them had never been stronger, and it became clear to everyone who witnessed it that this loyalty, courage, and love had altered the course of her life. The senior doctor, humbled and reflective, promised himself that he would never again give up on a patient too soon. He had learned a lesson that no book or lecture could teach. Sometimes the smallest, quietest forms of hope can make the greatest difference. And in this case, that hope had 4 paws, a wagging tail, and eyes full of unwavering determination. The days turned into weeks, and Emily's condition slowly but steadily improved. Each morning, her parents would arrive at the hospital with nervous anticipation, not knowing exactly what the day would bring. Yet every day they found their daughter a little stronger, a little more aware, and always greeted by the loyal eyes of Max, who refused to leave her side. He had become her constant companion, her protector, and in many ways her anchor in the hospital that had once felt cold and frightening. Emily's parents could hardly believe the transformation. The little girl who had been on the brink of losing her life now smiled more often, spoke in soft whispers, and even managed to sit up in her bed for short periods. The doctors and nurses marveled at her progress. What had been a room filled with despair was now a room filled with cautious joy. Yet everyone understood that the road ahead would still be long and challenging. Recovery was not complete, but the impossible had already begun. Max, as always, stayed alert. Every sound, every movement, every shift in the hospital ward drew his attention. Visitors were welcomed only if Max deemed them safe. Even the nurses had learned to approach quietly, speaking softly, letting him see their intentions. His presence was so reassuring to Emily that she would often reach for him first before looking at anyone else. She would stroke his fur, smile faintly, and whisper, "Thank you, Max," as if she knew the dog had given her life itself. The senior doctor visited the room frequently, no longer with a stern or clinical demeanor, but with humility and respect. He spoke softly to Emily, encouraging her to continue fighting, praising her courage and always acknowledging Max's extraordinary loyalty. The doctor had been humbled in ways he could never have anticipated. He admitted to himself that despite all his training and experience, sometimes life required more than medicine. Sometimes instinct, love, and loyalty could make the impossible happen. Word of the extraordinary event had begun to spread quietly throughout the hospital. Staff members would share the story with new nurses or visitors who arrived in the ward. The tale of a German shepherd who had stormed into a hospital room, stopped a tragic procedure, and indirectly saved a child's life became legendary in the hospital. Many were skeptical at first, but seeing Emily respond to Max's presence every day silenced any doubt. Max was no longer just a dog. He had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. Emily's parents were never far from her side. They spent hours reading to her, talking to her, and holding her hand. Each smile, each word, each tiny sign of progress felt miraculous, and throughout it all, Max was there. He never left her side, lying beside her during naps, curling around her when she sat up and resting his head gently on her legs when she was too tired to move. The child and the dog had formed a bond that went beyond companionship. It was a partnership in survival, a connection of heart and spirit that no one could break. One afternoon, as the sunlight streamed through the window, Emily managed to sit up fully for the first time. She looked around, her eyes bright with curiosity and life, and reached out for Max. He leaned into her touch, nuzzling her gently. The young doctor, watching this moment, smiled quietly. "She's really responding," he said to the senior doctor, who nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. "Yes," he said, "and it's because she never lost hope, and because she had Max." As the weeks passed, Emily's strength grew. She began to take small steps with the support of her parents and nurses. Her laughter, faint at first, became more frequent. Each day was a new victory, a testament to her resilience and the unwavering loyalty of her four-legged guardian. The hospital staff often watched in awe as Max would help guide her, staying close as she practiced walking, always alert and protective. It was clear that without him, the progress would not have been the same. The senior doctor, humbled by the events, decided to change the way he approached patient care. He spoke to his colleagues about the importance of hope, of second chances, and of listening to instincts beyond medicine. He reminded them that while medicine was powerful, life sometimes demanded more than charts and machines. It demanded patience, compassion, and occasionally, faith in the impossible. Emily's story began to attract attention outside the hospital as well. The local community heard about the little girl who had been saved, not just by medicine, but by the courage of a loyal German shepherd. People sent flowers, letters, and well wishes. Some came to visit her in the hospital, always under the watchful eye of Max. The dog, however, remained devoted to Emily alone. He tolerated strangers with caution, but never allowed anyone to come between him and the girl, who had been his entire world. As Emily continued to recover, she and Max developed a routine. Every morning, Max would greet her with a gentle nudge, encouraging her to get up and face the day. Every evening, she would hug him tightly before drifting off to sleep, knowing he would stay by her side all night. Her parents often watched, tears of gratitude and joy in their eyes, marveling at the unbreakable bond that had saved their daughter's life. One day, as Emily sat up in bed, she looked around at the hospital staff who had become part of her journey. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Thank you for saving me." Though her voice was still weak, it carried the power of someone who had survived against the odds. Max wagged his tail, nudging her gently as if he were saying, "We did it together." The hospital staff felt a mix of relief and awe. They had witnessed something extraordinary. A dog's loyalty had altered the course of a child's life. Emily's recovery, though ongoing, was proof that miracles could happen when hope, courage, and love aligned. Max, lying quietly beside her, had become a hero in the truest sense, not because of strength or size, but because of heart and devotion. Months later, Emily was well enough to leave the hospital. Her parents prepared her for the transition home, packing her belongings and making arrangements for her care. Max, of course, was included in every step. The family had learned that he was not just a pet, but a guardian, a friend, and a hero whose presence was essential for Emily's well-being. The day they left the hospital was filled with emotion. Doctors, nurses, and staff lined the hallways to bid farewell to Emily, cheering softly for the child who had fought back from the brink of death. Max stayed close, walking beside Emily as she made her way to the door, his tail wagging proudly. The parents thanked the hospital staff repeatedly, tears of gratitude streaming down their faces. And in that moment it was clear to everyone, Emily's life had been changed forever by the loyalty and love of a German shepherd who refused to give up. At home, Emily and Max settled into a new life together. The little girl, once so weak, now played gently in the garden, watched over by the dog who had saved her. Her laughter rang through the air, a sound of pure joy and recovery. Her parents watched, overwhelmed by happiness, as their daughter rediscovered life step by step, day by day. Emily's story became known throughout the town, a tale of hope, courage, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. The hospital staff often reflected on the lessons they had learned. Never give up too soon, listen to instincts, and remember that life can surprise even the most experienced doctors. And above all, the story reminded everyone that sometimes heroes come in the form of the most unexpected beings, with 4 paws, loyal eyes, and a heart full of devotion. Max remained by Emily's side always, her constant companion, her protector and her silent hero. And Emily, the little girl who had been so close to leaving the world, grew stronger each day, carrying with her the memory of how love, loyalty, and courage had given her a second chance at life.